He ordered the calf to be killed, but it came back brave. Blood pooled around José Mendonça's boots as he stared at the newborn calf sprawled in the red dirt. The animal wasn't moving, hadn't moved since it dropped from its mother's womb just minutes before. Too small, too weak, too early. José had seen it 100 times in his 57 years, working this unforgiving land in Mato Grosso. The scrubby pastures took more than they gave. No use wasting time on this one. Rodrigo. Put it down before sundown, he told his ranch hand, turning away from the sight. His voice carried no emotion, hardened by decades of such decisions. Rodrigo nodded silently, but his eyes lingered on the still-wet calf longer than necessary. At 26, he'd worked for old José for only 3 years. He still hadn't developed the necessary callousness that ranching in this harsh country demanded. The mother cow, a prized Nelore with genetics worth more than most of the vehicles on the ranch, lowed mournfully, nudging her motionless calf with her nose. Something in her desperate maternal persistence made Rodrigo hesitate. José didn't look back as he climbed into his battered pickup truck. He had 17,000 acres to manage and a banknote coming due at the end of the month. 1 week calf meant nothing in the brutal arithmetic of survival out here. The truck disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving Rodrigo alone with the cow and her seemingly doomed offspring. The young man knelt in the dirt, ignoring the blood soaking into his worn jeans. The calf's ribs showed through its pale hide, its breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. "I'm supposed to end you, little one," Rodrigo whispered, pulling his knife from its sheath at his belt. The steel glinted in the harsh sun. The mother cow bellowed, a sound so raw with grief it made Rodrigo's hand tremble. As if responding to its mother's call, the calf's eyelid fluttered. Rodrigo froze. Then, impossibly, the newborn's legs twitched, struggling to coordinate themselves beneath its frail body. Rodrigo sheathed his knife in an instant. "That's it! Fight!" he urged, his voice cracking with unexpected emotion. The calf's head lifted slightly, its dark eyes blinking against the sunlight it was seeing for the first time. In that moment, Rodrigo made a decision that would alter the course of not just his life, but the fortunes of Fazenda Esperança itself. He lifted the calf into his arms, its weight hardly more than a bag of feed, and carried it toward the small cabin he occupied at the edge of the ranch compound. "Your father says you're nothing," he whispered to the trembling creature, "but I see something in you, something Valente, brave." The mother cow followed, her protective instincts overriding her usual fear of humans. Together, this unlikely trio made their way across the dusty yard, unaware they were being observed from the window of the ranch office by Eduardo Mendonça, José's son and heir apparent to the struggling ranch. His expensive suit looked absurdly out of place against the weathered furniture and faded ledgers spread across the desk. Eduardo watched thoughtfully, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts as he reached for his cell phone. Inside his humble cabin, Rodrigo worked through the night. He had helped deliver hundreds of calves, but saving one this fragile was different. He mixed colostrum from the mother with warm water, feeding the calf a few drops at a time from an old soda bottle fitted with a rubber nipple. The mother cow stood sentinel just outside the cabin door, refusing to leave despite Rodrigo's attempts to return her to the herd. "She knows you're special," he told the calf as it finally began to suckle with purpose. "Your mama believes in you, and so do I." Dawn was breaking when José's truck skidded to a halt outside the cabin. Rodrigo steeled himself for the confrontation. The old rancher would be furious. Wasting time and resources on a doomed animal was the kind of sentimentality that had bankrupted many a cattleman before. The door crashed open, José's weathered face a thundercloud of anger. "You defied my direct order," he growled, taking in the scene, Rodrigo on the floor, the tiny calf wrapped in his old blankets, the protective cow visible through the open doorway. "I take full responsibility, sir," Rodrigo replied, rising to his feet. "But this calf wants to live. I can see it in his eyes." "You see nothing but your own foolishness," José spat. "We cannot afford to waste time nursing runts when the whole ranch is hanging by a thread." "Father." Eduardo appeared in the doorway, his city shoes incongruous in the dusty cabin. He moved past José to kneel beside the calf, examining it with surprising gentleness for a man who spent his days in corporate boardrooms. "This is a fine specimen, despite its size," Eduardo observed. "Perfect markings, good bone structure. It has its mother's eyes," José scoffed. "What would you know about cattle? You left this life behind for your fancy degree and big city deals." Eduardo stood, brushing dust from his expensive trousers. "I know more than you think, Father. That cow out there is your best breeder, carrying the bloodline you paid a fortune for 5 years ago. Her genetics are exceptional. And according to the lab results I had done on our herd last month, without your knowledge, I admit, she carries a rare strain that produces unusually tender meat without sacrificing muscle mass." José's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What lab results? I never authorized." "Because you're too stubborn to see that the old ways aren't working anymore," Eduardo cut in. "We're 3 months away from losing everything unless we modernize. This calf might look weak, but its genetic potential is worth more than 10 ordinary calves." Rodrigo, forgotten in the tension between father and son, continued to tend to the calf, which had begun trying to stand on wobbly legs. José watched the animal's determined efforts, something unreadable crossing his weathered face. "1 week. He finally declared. "You have 1 week to prove this runt is worth the effort. After that, I decide its fate." Without waiting for a response, José turned and left the cabin, the door banging behind him. Eduardo and Rodrigo exchanged a long look. Despite their different backgrounds and positions, they found themselves unlikely allies in this small act of defiance. "Why did you help?" Rodrigo asked. "You've never shown interest in the actual ranching before." Eduardo loosened his tie, looking suddenly tired. "Because sometimes valor isn't about physical strength, but about the willingness to fight against the odds. I watched you carry this calf across the yard yesterday, and it reminded me of something I'd forgotten about this place." He didn't elaborate further, but nodded toward the struggling calf. "1 week," he repeated. "Make it count." With that cryptic statement, Eduardo followed his father, leaving Rodrigo alone with his fragile charge and a flickering hope that perhaps something more than just a calf's life hung in the balance of the coming days. The mother cow lowed softly from the doorway, as if offering her own encouragement to her determined offspring, now standing shakily on spindly legs that refused to surrender to gravity or fate. "We'll show them," Rodrigo promised, both to the calf and to himself. "I'm naming you Valente, brave one, and you're going to save us all." The first 3 days tested Rodrigo's resolve to breaking point. The calf, now officially named Valente, struggled to stand for more than a few minutes at a time. Its appetite was inconsistent, sometimes eagerly taking the bottle, other times turning away as if the effort to live was simply too great. Through it all, Rodrigo barely slept, alternating between encouraging the calf to feed and checking its vital signs with the basic veterinary knowledge he'd acquired over his years on ranches. The mother cow refused to return to the herd, maintaining her vigil outside Rodrigo's cabin despite the ranch hands' attempts to move her. Her devotion became something of a spectacle among the workers, many of whom began stopping by under various pretexts to check on the unlikely pair. On the morning of the 4th day, Rodrigo awoke with a start, realizing he'd fallen asleep on the floor beside the makeshift pen he'd constructed for Valente. Panicked, he scrambled up, only to find the pen empty. "No, no, no," he muttered, his heart sinking as he scanned the small cabin. A soft lowing from outside drew his attention. Rodrigo flung open the door to find Valente standing in the early morning light, wobbly but upright, nursing from his mother. The sight brought unexpected tears to Rodrigo's eyes. "You sneaky little fighter," he laughed, relief washing over him. "How did you get out there?" The answer came from Eduardo, who was leaning against a fence post, watching the scene with undisguised interest. "He pushed his way through that gap in your pen around dawn," Eduardo explained. "Been out here for about 40 minutes now. Walked to his mother all on his own." Rodrigo stared in disbelief. The calf that had been too weak to stand for more than moments at a time had somehow found the strength to escape his pen and navigate to his mother. "I think our little Valente is living up to his name," Eduardo said, approaching the duo with careful steps to avoid startling the cow. "He's still so small," Rodrigo worried aloud. "Your father won't be impressed by size alone." Eduardo's expression turned thoughtful. "Then we'll need to show him something else." Over the next 2 days, Valente's strength grew exponentially. He progressed from tentative steps to curious exploration of the area around Rodrigo's cabin. The mother cow, whom Rodrigo had taken to calling Estrela for the star-shaped marking on her forehead, remained protectively close, but allowed her calf increasing independence. Rodrigo documented everything: Valente's weight gain, his increasing coordination, his alert responsiveness. Eduardo brought a veterinarian friend from the city who confirmed the calf, while still undersized, was developing normally in every other respect. "His heart and lungs are strong," the vet noted with professional admiration. "And his muscle tone is improving rapidly. I've seen far worse cases turn into prize bulls." Word of the miracle calf spread through the ranch. Workers began stopping by during breaks, some bringing handfuls of special feed or herbs their grandmothers had sworn by for strengthening livestock. Even the cook, Donna Cecilia, arrived with a concoction of honey and herbs she insisted would have put fire in the little one's blood. Only José remained conspicuously absent. He continued his daily management of the vast ranch, pointedly ignoring the growing commotion around his youngest employee's cabin. The deadline, 1 week from the morning he had discovered Rodrigo's defiance, loomed large. On the 6th day, as Rodrigo was exercising Valente in the small corral he and the other hands had constructed, Eduardo arrived with unusual urgency in his steps. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Father has agreed to sell the ranch." Rodrigo's hands froze on the rope halter he'd fashioned for the calf. "Sell? To whom?" "Agrocorp Consolidated?" Eduardo spat the name like a curse. "The same company that's been buying up all the struggling family operations in the region. They'll convert everything to mass production, automated systems, minimal human oversight. Most of the hands will be let go." Rodrigo felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Fazenda Esperança had been in the Mendonça family for 4 generations. Despite its recent struggles, it remained one of the few traditional operations that prioritized quality over quantity, that still respected the old ways of ranching even as it adapted to modern necessities. "Why now?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Eduardo gestured toward the small calf, now pushing playfully against Rodrigo's leg. "Because of what this represents. The representatives from Agrocorp visited yesterday. They spoke of efficiency, of eliminating sentimental decisions that impact the bottom line. Animals like Valente would never be given a chance in their system. Everything is algorithms and projected yield calculations." Rodrigo's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "When is the sale being finalized?" "Tomorrow morning, the day his week for Valente runs out. It's not coincidence." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by Valente's soft snuffling as he explored the edges of the corral. From the distance came the familiar sound of José's truck approaching along the dusty road that connected the ranch buildings. "He's early," Eduardo noted, checking his watch. José's truck pulled up beside the corral, dust billowing around it before settling in the still afternoon air. The old rancher stepped out, his face unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. His corporate-minded son standing alongside his most junior ranch hand and the small calf that had sparked such controversy. "I see the runt survived," José observed, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "His name is Valente," Rodrigo replied, a newfound steadiness in his tone. "And he's not just surviving, he's thriving." José approached the fence, studying the calf with the practiced eye of a man who had evaluated thousands of cattle in his lifetime. "Still too small," he declared dismissively. "Wouldn't bring half the market price of his peers." "That's not the only measure of value, father," Eduardo interjected, an unusual edge to his voice. "Sometimes the greatest worth lies in what an animal represents, not just what it weighs on the scale." José's weathered face hardened. "Poetic notions don't pay bank loans, son. You of all people should understand that, with your business degree and fancy calculations." "I understand more than you think," Eduardo countered, stepping closer to his father. "I know about the deal with Agrocorp. I know you're selling our heritage, our way of life, because you're too proud to admit we need to adapt rather than surrender." José's expression flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or a flicker of shame quickly suppressed. "The decision is made. The papers will be signed tomorrow." "And what about the people who depend on this ranch? What about the traditions that make our beef special? What about everything your father and his father built?" Eduardo's voice rose uncharacteristically. José turned away, his shoulders stiff with decades of burden. "Sometimes we must accept defeat with dignity." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Rodrigo watched the exchange with growing despair, one hand resting protectively on Valente's small back. The calf, seemingly oblivious to the human drama unfolding, had settled contentedly at Rodrigo's feet. Then, without warning, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main pasture. Shouts and the sounds of hooves pounding dirt carried across the ranch yard. One of the senior hands, Miguel, came running toward them, his face flushed with exertion. "Señor Mendonça, the new bull, Conquistador. He's broken through the north fence. He's heading toward the road." José's face drained of color. Conquistador was the ranch's most valuable asset, a prize breeding bull purchased at tremendous expense the previous year. The massive animal represented José's final gamble to restore the ranch's dwindling fortunes, costing nearly a third of their operating capital. More immediately concerning was the danger the bull posed if he reached the public road where cars regularly passed. "Get the horses," José commanded, years of authority returning to his voice. "Eduardo, call the highway patrol. Tell them to close that stretch of road." The ranch exploded into action. Hands raced toward the stables, while Eduardo pulled out his phone, already running toward his vehicle. José turned to Rodrigo, who was securing Valente back in his pen. "You stay with the calf," he ordered, before hurrying toward his truck. Rodrigo watched the flurry of activity, his mind racing. Conquistador was over a ton of pure muscle and notorious for his aggressive temperament. The north pasture bordered the main highway. If the bull reached the road, a decision crystallized in Rodrigo's mind. He quickly secured Valente in his pen and ran to the small shed beside his cabin. From inside, he pulled out an old but well-maintained dirt bike, his only personal transportation. Unlike horses, which would need to be saddled, the bike could get him to the north fence in minutes. As he kick-started the engine, Estrela, Valente's mother, let out a distressed bellow. Valente responded with a high-pitched call of his own. Rodrigo had no time to consider what had agitated them. Every second counted if they were to prevent potential tragedy on the highway. The dirt bike roared to life, spitting gravel as Rodrigo accelerated across the ranch yard and toward the north pasture. He took the direct route, jumping small irrigation ditches and skirting around equipment sheds. In the distance, he could see dust clouds where the ranch hands were converging on horseback, but they were taking the longer, safer route. Rodrigo would reach the broken fence first. He crested a small hill and immediately spotted Conquistador. The massive white bull was moving with surprising speed toward the highway, now less than 500 yards away. Worse, Rodrigo could see a school bus approaching along the road, its yellow exterior bright against the landscape. Without hesitation, Rodrigo gunned the engine and cut a diagonal path to intercept the bull. The noise of the motorcycle caught Conquistador's attention. The massive animal paused, turning its enormous head toward this new threat. Rodrigo had worked around enough bulls to know the danger signs. Conquistador's head lowered, front hoof pouring the dirt. Classic pre-charge behavior, but Rodrigo had committed to his course. He needed to divert the bull away from the highway at any cost. Circling wide around Conquistador, Rodrigo revved his engine aggressively, hoping to provoke the territorial animal into following him rather than continuing toward the road. The bull snorted, momentarily confused by this noisy intruder. "Come on, you oversized steak," Rodrigo shouted, circling closer. "This way!" The distraction worked too well. With a bellow that seemed to shake the ground, Conquistador charged directly at the motorcycle. Rodrigo twisted the throttle, dirt spraying as he veered away from the road. The bull followed, its massive bulk surprisingly agile as it changed direction. The motorcycle had the advantage of speed, but the uneven terrain made maneuvering treacherous. Rodrigo led the bull further from the highway, zigzagging through the pasture. His plan was working, but now he faced a new problem: how to escape the enraged animal once the immediate danger to the highway was averted. As he rounded a stand of scrub trees, the front wheel of his bike hit a hidden irrigation ditch. The impact sent Rodrigo flying over the handlebars while his motorcycle cartwheeled in the opposite direction. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Pain shot through his ankle as he tried to stand. Conquistador was less than 50 yards away and closing fast. In that moment, Rodrigo accepted the grim calculus of his situation. The bus full of children would pass safely. The ranch hands would eventually corral Conquistador. His sacrifice would not be in vain. He closed his eyes, preparing for the impact. Instead of the expected collision, Rodrigo heard something that made no sense: the high-pitched call of a calf. His eyes snapped open to see an impossible sight. Standing between him and the charging bull was Valente, the tiny calf barely larger than Conquistador's head. Even more incredibly, behind Valente was Estrela, her maternal instincts apparently having driven both animals to break free and follow Rodrigo. The mother cow positioned herself beside her calf, facing down the oncoming threat. Conquistador skidded to a halt just yards away, clearly confused by this unexpected confrontation. The massive bull snorted, pawing the ground, but something in Estrela's posture gave him pause. She stood firm, neither advancing nor retreating, her calf improbably steady at her side. The tableau held for what seemed like an eternity, the massive breeding bull facing down a mother cow and her undersized calf, with Rodrigo forgotten behind this unlikely shield. A shout broke the standoff as José's truck skidded to a halt nearby. The old rancher jumped out, rope in hand, his weathered face a mask of disbelief at the scene before him. "Don't move," he called to Rodrigo. "The other hands are circling around behind." But it wasn't Rodrigo who moved. It was Valente. The small calf took a deliberate step toward Conquistador, then another. The bull lowered his head, nostrils flaring. Everyone watching expected the massive animal to charge again at any moment. Instead, something remarkable happened. Valente approached the bull with no sign of fear, his small head held high. When he was just feet away from the enormous animal, the calf stopped and let out a sound that seemed impossibly commanding for his size. Conquistador raised his head, sniffed the air, and then, in a gesture that left everyone watching in stunned silence, turned away from Valente and began grazing as if nothing had happened. By the time the other ranch hands arrived on horseback, the crisis was effectively over. They quickly secured a rope around Conquistador's neck and began leading the now docile bull back toward his proper pasture. Rodrigo sat in the dirt, his injured ankle throbbing, watching as Valente trotted back to his side as if he hadn't just performed something miraculous. Estrela followed, her maternal vigilance never wavering. José approached slowly, his expression unreadable as he looked down at Rodrigo and the small calf. "You could have been killed," he said gruffly, though his tone lacked its usual harshness. "The bus!" Rodrigo began, gesturing toward the highway. José nodded once, understanding. "A brave but foolish decision," he conceded. "And this—" He gestured toward Valente and Estrela. "What did I just witness?" Before Rodrigo could attempt an explanation, Eduardo arrived, parking his luxury SUV beside his father's truck. He rushed over, concern evident on his face. "Rodrigo! Are you hurt? What happened? The ranch hands told me." He stopped abruptly, noticing Valente standing protectively beside Rodrigo. "How did the calf get here?" Eduardo asked, confusion clear in his voice. "That, my son, is the question of the hour," José replied, his tone thoughtful as he studied the small white calf. "This undersized runt just stood down Conquistador, the most aggressive bull I've owned in 40 years. Eduardo helped Rodrigo to his feet, supporting him as he tested his injured ankle. "Valente and Estrela must have broken out of the pen when they heard the commotion," Rodrigo explained, wincing as he put weight on his leg. "They followed me. And then when Conquistador was about to charge me after I crashed, Valente just stepped between us, like he was protecting me." "Impossible," José muttered, though his eyes told a different story as he watched Valente press against Rodrigo's good leg. "Cattle don't behave that way." "Perhaps we don't give them enough credit," Eduardo suggested quietly. "Or perhaps there are some things that defy our usual calculations." José's weathered face worked through a series of emotions. For a man who had spent his entire life making hard decisions based on practicality, the scene he had just witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about cattle, and perhaps about value itself. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice softer than Rodrigo had ever heard it. "Get him back to the ranch house. Donna Cecilia can look at that ankle. The calf and its mother." He hesitated, then continued with surprising gentleness. "Bring them too. They've earned a better shelter than that makeshift pen." As the small procession made its way back toward the main house, Eduardo, supporting Rodrigo, Valente and Estrela following close behind, José remained alone for a moment, staring thoughtfully toward the highway where a tragedy had been narrowly averted. Dawn broke over Fazenda Esperança with unusual activity. Black sedans with tinted windows, cars that looked distinctly out of place against the rustic backdrop, were parked in front of the main house. Men in expensive suits consulted papers and checked watches, occasionally glancing toward the horizon where the sun was climbing over endless acres of grazing land. Inside the house, around the large oak table that had hosted 4 generations of Mendonça family decisions, sat José, Eduardo, and 3 representatives from Agrocorp Consolidated. Papers were spread across the worn surface, pens laid out in precise alignment. "All we need is your signature, Mr. Mendonça, and we can complete the transaction before noon," said the lead executive, a man whose manicured appearance suggested he'd never spent a day working land with his hands. "The agreed-upon sum will be transferred immediately upon completion." José stared at the documents before him, his weathered hands resting flat on either side of the contract. His face betrayed nothing of his thoughts. "You've made the right decision," the executive continued, mistaking José's silence for hesitation. The market is only becoming more challenging for operations of this size. Agrocorp has the resources and technology to maximize this land's potential. Potential, José repeated, the word hanging in the air. An interesting concept. Eduardo watched his father carefully, noting the unusual thoughtfulness in the old man's demeanor. Since the incident with Conquistador the previous day, José had been uncharacteristically quiet, spending hours alone on the porch of the main house, staring out over the land that had been in his family for generations. A commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Through the window, they could see Rodrigo limping across the yard, his ankle bandaged but clearly still painful. Behind him trotted Valente, the small calf refusing to be separated from the man who had saved his life. More surprising was the procession following them, nearly every ranch hand on the property, walking in respectful formation as if in a ceremony. "What's this?" the Agrocorp executive asked, frowning at the interruption. José stood slowly. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, a matter requires my attention." Without waiting for a response, he walked out onto the wide porch that wrapped around the old ranch house. Eduardo followed, curiosity overriding his usual corporate reserve. The Agrocorp executives exchanged confused glances before reluctantly trailing after their hosts. The gathering in the yard had grown. Ranch hands, kitchen staff, and even the seasonal workers stood in a loose circle around Rodrigo and Valente. José descended the steps, his presence creating a respectful hush among the assembled workers. "Señor Mendonça," Rodrigo began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "I know today is an important day for the ranch's future, but before any decisions are made, we, all of us, wanted you to see something." He gestured to Miguel, the senior ranch hand, who stepped forward carrying what looked like a large ledger. The old cowboy opened it with careful reverence, revealing pages of neatly handwritten entries. "This is the original record book your grandfather started," Miguel explained, his voice rough with emotion. "Every calf born on this ranch for the past 70 years is recorded here, their lineage, their traits, their contributions to the herd." He turned the book toward José, pointing to an entry from decades past. "This was Relampago, born small and weak during the drought of 72. Your father was going to cull him, but your grandfather saw something in his eyes, what he called the fire of persistence. That calf grew to sire the line that became our strongest producers in the 80s, the cattle that saved this ranch during the market crash." Miguel turned to another page, and here, Milagre, born during the floods of 97. You yourself decided to spare her when others said she was too small to be worth the feed. Her descendants now make up a third of our breeding stock. José's expression remained unreadable as Miguel turned to the final page, where a fresh entry had been made in new ink. "Valente," Miguel read aloud, "born May 17th, 2025. Dam, Estrela. Sire, Conquistador." José's head snapped up at this last detail. "Conquistador?" he questioned sharply. "That's impossible." "Estrela was never bred to him." "We checked the records, sir," Miguel confirmed respectfully. "Estrela escaped her enclosure the same night Conquistador broke through the interior fence between breeding sections. It was logged but not reported up because the fence was repaired immediately. The implications hung in the air. Valente wasn't just any calf. He carried the bloodlines of both the ranch's most valuable breeding cow and their prize bull. His genetic value was potentially enormous. As if sensing he was the subject of discussion, Valente approached José, his small frame moving with surprising steadiness for an animal so young. The calf stopped directly in front of the old rancher, looking up with what everyone present would later swear was deliberate intentness. José stared down at the small white calf that had defied his death sentence, that had shown courage beyond reason, that carried bloodlines worth more than most of the equipment on the property. Something shifted in the old man's face, a softening around the eyes, a slight tremor at the corner of his mouth. Slowly, with dignity that spoke of his years working this land, José knelt in the dirt before Valente. His weathered hand, lined with decades of hard work and harder decisions, reached out to rest on the calf's head in a gesture that was almost a blessing. All my life, I've calculated value in weights and measures, in market prices and feed conversion ratios, José said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed yard. I forgot what my father knew, what his father taught him, that sometimes value shows itself in ways we can't measure with scales or spreadsheets. He looked up at the assembled workers, at his son, and finally at the Agrocorp executives who stood awkwardly on the porch. This calf was condemned by my judgment. I saw weakness where I should have seen potential. I saw burden where I should have seen possibility. José rose to his feet, his decision evident in his straightened shoulders and clear gaze. Gentlemen, he addressed the executives directly. I'm afraid I won't be signing your contract today, or any day. The lead executive stepped forward, his corporate composure cracking slightly. Mr. Mendonça, you're making a serious mistake. The market realities. The market, José interrupted with newfound strength, has been my master for too long. I've allowed fear of failure to blind me to the legacy I'm responsible for. This ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's people. It's knowledge passed through generations. It's a way of life worth preserving. He turned to Eduardo, whose expression revealed both surprise and something like pride. My son tried to tell me we needed to adapt, not surrender. I was too proud to listen. He gestured toward Rodrigo and Valente. It took the courage of our youngest hand and our youngest calf to make me understand. Eduardo stepped forward, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. It's not too late, Father. The modernization plans I've been developing, they don't replace our traditions. They build on them. We can combine your experience with new approaches, find markets that value quality over quantity. The lead Agrocorp executive cleared his throat. I should remind you that your bank loan will be refinanced, Eduardo interjected smoothly. I've already spoken with several investors interested in sustainable ranching operations. They value the Mendonça name and reputation. We'll need to make changes, become more efficient in certain areas, but we won't compromise on what makes this ranch special. The Agrocorp team recognized defeat when they saw it. With thinly veiled annoyance, they gathered their papers and retreated to their vehicles, leaving behind the contract that would have ended 4 generations of ranching tradition. As the dust from their departing cars settled, a new energy seemed to flow through the assembled ranch community. Workers who had been resigned to losing their livelihoods now buzzed with tentative hope. José found himself surrounded by men and women eager to share ideas they'd held back, believing the old patron, too, set in his ways to listen. Amidst the impromptu celebration, Rodrigo sat on the porch steps, his injured ankle propped up. Valente contentedly settled beside him. Eduardo joined them, loosening his tie and rolling up the sleeves of his expensive shirt. You've started quite a revolution, he said to Rodrigo with genuine respect. Rodrigo shook his head. Not me. Him, he replied, scratching behind Valente's ears. Sometimes the smallest among us show the greatest courage. José approached, looking somehow younger despite the weight of the decisions ahead. He regarded the unlikely trio, his corporate-educated son, his youngest ranch hand, and the undersized calf that had changed everything. Valente will need special training, he announced, as if continuing a conversation already in progress, if he's to become the foundation of our new breeding program. Rodrigo looked up in surprise. You want to use him for breeding? Even though he's smaller than standard, José's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Size isn't his only quality. Courage, intelligence, loyalty, these traits matter too. Perhaps they matter most of all. He paused, gazing out over the land that would remain in Mendonça hands for another generation at least. Sometimes value reveals itself in unexpected moments. We just need the wisdom to recognize it when we see it. As if understanding the significance of the moment, Valente rose to his feet and pressed his head against José's hand, the same hand that had once signed his death sentence, now offering him a future as the symbol of Fazenda Esperanza's renewal. The ranch's name, Hope Farm, had never seemed more fitting,